Hi, Purpleella here, and today I would like to talk about autism and overstimulation. Now, I recognise as an autistic woman that my tolerance for stimulation is a lot lower than it is for what I've observed for neurotypical people. So, for example, last Friday, we took our boys to an event at the NEC. If you read my blog, you would know this, called the Big Bang Fair, all about science, maths and engineering. It's a very, very busy environment. It's an NEC, it's a conference centre, so you've got your fluorescent lighting, it's very noisy, it's a big echoey kind of hangar type space, and it's filled with children and exciting activities and shows. So I found this particularly challenging, and what I recognise starts to happen is as I become more and more overstimulated, I actually, unfortunately, become a little bit irritable and I feel a little bit agitated and I start to feel a bit fizzy being, you know, like a build up of stuff, and I really struggle with that. So by the time we got to the car after 5 hours at this event, I was really feeling like, you know, racing heart, like I've had too much caffeine and I've been running around for half an hour and I've been, you know, really massively stimulated. And I started to recognise that I started to become quite irritable with Mr. Purple, my husband, and he hadn't done anything wrong. In fact, quite the opposite. He'd been incredibly supportive. So what I did manage to do in that moment was to decide to stop talking. So I pulled it back, stopped talking, let my head regain some sense of calm before being ready and able to deal with verbal communication again. So that overstimulation has been a really problematic thing for me. And I'm kind of gradually and slowly learning how to manage it. So to explain to you a little bit how it feels, have you ever been at a supermarket checkout and the person who is scanning your stuff is maybe they're just about to have their lunch break and they're like, right, I'm going to get this through really quickly, or maybe they're just a very efficient checkout operative, but for whatever reason they start putting your items through really fast and you're at the other end and you've got your bags and you're trying to load the stuff into bags, but it's coming too fast and it starts to pile up and it starts to make you feel a little bit anxious. Or maybe that's just me, maybe everyone else deals with their supermarket shopping calmly, I don't know, but that is the sensation for me. It's like stuff input is coming in and at first it's manageable and I'm able to pack it into my brain and into my experience, and eventually it just starts to feel like it's all coming at me and I can't cope with it, but I want to keep trying to cope with it because I want to fit in and I don't want to stand out as someone who can't cope, and so I try to cope with it, and in the end I often end up feeling very irritable or snappy, or even in the worst case scenario basically having a meltdown. So I recognised that this is what had happened to me last Friday, and it was really interesting because actually what I've been doing recently is really trying hard to manage my life in a way that avoids overstimulation. So it was a sensation that I've managed to avoid for quite a while. So it was kind of a really familiar thing, but also kind of oh look, I've been managing to avoid this. And what I realised in that moment was that prior to my diagnosis and prior to the changes that I've made in my life to cope with the stimulation, I actually felt like that a good kind of 95% of the time. And I think that this is particularly problematic for me because I am not really an introvert. I'm not really a be on my own kind of person. I like being around people. I like conversation. I like people and I like being around them, and I also like exciting experiences, and I often put myself in a situation where I used to put myself in a situation where I'd be like, coffee morning, meeting, lunch, meet another friend, come home, be around the children, go out for the evening, and I was perpetually living like this in a way that made it actually very, very difficult for me to cope with life, and I was having a lot of meltdowns and I was quite irritable and quite paranoid, and it generally really wasn't good for me. But it's quite hard to fight that impulse when you're not someone who necessarily likes being on her own. So how do you manage the balance of I like being around people and I like doing stuff, but I can get very easily overstimulated and actually what I need is lots of alone time? And I'm not going to tell you the answer. I'm actually genuinely asking, how do you manage that balance if you're anything like me? For now, what I've been doing to try and manage that balance is is mindfulness. I know, I keep going on at you about mindfulness, but mindfulness, it just entirely rocks. So I'm doing mindfulness every day using the Headspace app, and I notice that when I start a mindfulness session, my jaw is clenched and I can feel like twitchiness in my eyes and my face, and I feel like I'm a little bit wired, like I've drunk maybe 10 cups of coffee, and my body feels tense. And I do the session and I start to recognize those sensations and those feelings, and at the end of the session I generally feel a little bit calmer. So I know that it's really important that I do that every day alongside my daily yoga, which is also obviously a very mindful activity. The other thing that I definitely need to do is schedule my life in a way that means that I'm getting plenty of time alone, or very low stimulation time. So, you know, around people, but not necessarily conversing, not necessarily involved. So I recognise that I need to do that, but I also recognise that I am not perfect at organising my life in a way that makes that happen. But I know that I really, really need to, because the impact on my family of me being calmer and more centred is massive. And the only way for me to achieve that is to avoid overstimulation. So it comes back to being autistic means that my understanding of it means that I am experiencing the world in a way that is a lot more full on than for a neurotypical person. So everything that happens, everything that's said, every noise, every experience, really, I'm getting the whole full on, all of it, without any kind of, it's like I'm stood in front of those tennis ball machines that fire out tennis balls rapidly for people who can do that to practice. And it's like I'm stood in front of one of those, and initially it starts firing out, coffee with a friend, meeting at school, make sure the kids do their homework, and I'm whacking them back, and that's all fine until they start coming more and more rapidly, and I can't fire them back, and I'm stood up against a wall with tennis balls coming at me. And that's really tricky to manage. So that's overstimulation for you in a nutshell. That's how it feels, bombarded by a tennis ball machine and unable to make it stop, and unable to move, and unable to really, by the time I get to that point, know that that's what's happening and recognise what to do about it. So part of my journey is really learning to manage my life in a way that means I can cope with it, but also learning to recognise when it's happening and pull the escape cord and find a way out and find a way back to my calm and centered self. So I'm trying to keep my vlogs a little bit, my vlogs, my kids really mock me because I call them vlogs, which makes me sound about 100 years old. Vlogs. I'm trying to keep them a little bit shorter so that you guys are just getting a little bite of me rather than could you stop droning on at us now. So I'm going to end that there, and maybe I'll talk about overstimulation in a little bit more detail another time. Hope you guys are having a great week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.